Yes, so good afternoon and welcome to uh, this session on introduction to impact evaluation. And therefore, I have to say that we shall not get into the nitty gritties of how to do how to calculate sample sizes or how to strategize on looking for groups that can be involved in the intervention or for comparison purposes. So mainly it's we shall focus on the introduction to just get acquainted with what impact evaluation is and and then after exploring what impact evaluation is, we can look at an overview of different approaches and designs for impact evaluation. And when we get to those the designs, I'll just give an overview of those different designs with the view that in your module 5, I think, you will have a whole module on impact evaluation, and therefore in that case you'll get to explore more about impact evaluation, but also get into the details of how to do impact evaluation, data correction, sampling techniques of participants, and so on. Okay, so let's get started. Maybe if I may ask, what do you understand as impact? Yeah. Yes, Jotham.
Thank you so much, Solomon, and everyone else. I believe everyone is doing fine, and in the first place, we would like to thank you because you sound well. Fine, Solomon.
Yeah.
Thank God for your health.
Yeah.
Impact evaluation to me, in the simplest terms, I would say we are trying to look at an intervention or a policy or a program or a project, basically, but then we are trying to look at the intended goal or impact or that the evaluation or maybe the intervention was designed for. And then we are trying to see a lot of positives coming in, and then we are trying to see whether these positives, whether the results coming in are as a result of this intervention that we tried to start up in the first place to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So then we see evaluation as that kind of assessment to see or to ascertain whether we have the results, and then the results are as a result of the intervention that we set up in the first place.
Thank you, Jotham. Indeed, So the impacts can be positive, can be negative, can be primary or secondary in a long-term process. They can be intended or they can be unintended. They can be directly linked or indirectly linked to the intervention. So when we are looking at evaluating impacts, we are therefore looking at getting information regarding those outcomes from the intervention that we have implemented, and therefore we are looking at either positive or negative or intended or unintended. So usually, of course, looking at our theories of changes and so on regarding certain interventions, we always aim at getting the positives. The projects, the interventions, the policies, the programs are always aiming at getting the best of an implementation of such an intervention. But then at the end of the day, because of complexity of the different interventions in different contexts, interventions sometimes result in negative or unintended outcomes that might actually come up. Of course, put in mind that unintended can also be negative and positive. Also, intended can be positive in that case, based on the theory of change. So, based on the models of causal effect, sometimes we tend to try to assess whether we can attribute the realized outcomes or results to any project or program that has been implemented, and therefore we tend so much to look at the causal effect attributes to see whether indeed the project is the one responsible for the results that we are seeing. So in that case, sometimes when we want to completely do attribution rather than contribution, we use those models that can actually help in controlling other factors, because we all know that the complexity of implementation of those interventions is brought about by the factors such as available resources, such as external environment, maybe other policies, and maybe risks and disasters, conflicts, and so on that might affect our interventions. So sometimes we want to look for those measures that control other factors other than our own intervention, if we really want to account for the observed changes. Otherwise, if we do not control those other factors, then we are looking at many outcomes that might not necessarily be as a result of our intervention. So to do that, we do what we call counterfactual. And counterfactual in this situation looks at any situation or condition that may prevail where there is no intervention. So for instance, we try using counterfactual, we are trying to look at identifying what would have happened if the intervention was not there. So you can see the blue line here. That's the counterfactual. Because if we are saying, okay, if you look at the red line in the middle there, let me see if I can get a better way of viewing this. Okay. Anyway, let's just continue. I hope you'll, but I'm sure you'll follow. I'll just try to use the arrow. So if you see in the middle here, you see the intervention. That intervention, so we are saying that the situation from the beginning, in the first line, in the first this first y-axis line, towards the middle red line, you will see that, okay, the situation was improving somehow with time. But then with the introduction of the impact, if you see the gray line above, that indicates that is the trajectory after the intervention. The blue line below is the trajectory without intervention, and the gap between the gap between the gap between the intervention trajectory and the without intervention trajectory is what we term as the impact. So when we are looking at using counterfactual, we are controlling other factors to see, to test whether the realized changes are indeed actually the result of that intervention. And therefore, that's why we use that counterfactual. Of course, also based on the counterfactual trajectory also is also dependent on the baseline. We already talked about the baseline and its importance. So here we have a more detailed graphical output. So when we are measuring the effect of an intervention or the impact, so you have the first line there, where so you have the change on your y-axis, the change in intervention outcome. Then below on the x-axis, you have the time. Okay, so you have the start of the intervention up to the intervention ends, if you may see that regarding time. Now, when we go back to the upper graphs, so you see that now the upper line shows with intervention that from the beginning when the intervention started. If the intervention would start, it means that we would achieve the greater heights or percentage with the line which is with the intervention. But then if the intervention is not implemented, that's where we have without intervention, then you would have the lower line, the lower baseline, which shows the without intervention. So the middle part would therefore be indicating the intervention impact, meaning that with the introduction of the intervention, without the intervention, the situation would have remained at the lower standard as indicated without the intervention. But if the intervention is introduced, or when the intervention was introduced, there was a better improvement, and therefore showing in the graph for with intervention up here. Okay, so again, if you go below down, you will see that I've indicated baseline indicator and impact indicator. So with time and with the introduction of the intervention, there must be realized change. Okay, so and that realized change is what we use to measure whether indeed the intervention has created some impact or not. Okay, of course, as always, basing on the data that we collect from baseline, and therefore we can be able to know that based on the indicators we got during baseline, there has been an improvement, and therefore this is the magnitude of the impact that the intervention has I don't know why the sharing has stopped, but I will see if I can bring it back. Maybe it was just network issues. Okay. Yeah, so that is what I mean by counterfactual. Okay. So then again, as a reminder, why baseline? Of course, it is critical for impact evaluation, because without the indicators or baseline data, then we may not possibly know what kind of changes, what kind of changes have been realized, or whether the realized changes are as a result of our intervention. So it allows that measurement of progress against the start point, and of course usually allowing you to modify interventions midway if necessary, if you decide to carry out mid-term evaluations and so on. Okay, so why do we do impact evaluation? Of course, we want to improve or reorganize an intervention. If we, for instance, do it at a certain phase, we want to see that, okay, maybe some unintended negative outcomes have been cropping up during implementation or at the close of the intervention, and therefore if we might want to scale up the intervention, then we might need to make some improvements to identify those critical areas for improvement for a better and effective delivery. So for instance, if a policy is excuse me, if a policy is on maybe let's say establishing breastfeeding facilities in institutions, yeah, my network is off, but I think I am having some issues with my network on my laptop, but you have to, yeah, to pardon me for some time when that happens. But whenever I have access, I'll keep sharing back. Okay. Okay. So. So we also want to do impact evaluation to be able to have informed decision making about continuity or replication or scaling up or termination. So I was talking about, for instance, you want to establish maybe a maternity section or a breastfeeding facility for people at workplace, and therefore if you want to, you implement it, and then after some period of time you assess the evaluation, you assess, I mean, the whether your intervention has improved anything regarding maternal and child health, and therefore you want, if you want to scale it maybe to other institutions, government institutions, schools, or health centers, and then you have now some good evidence that is generated from impact evaluation, and therefore you can use it for purposes of making decisions that would therefore make you implement better policy decisions that fit within context of certain communities. Okay, so it's very important that you have impact evaluation to establish whether you want to replicate or do your implementation again. Okay. So again, it's done for purposes of accountability, as always, accountability and learning. Okay, so it's important that the stakeholders of a certain intervention measure the effectiveness or relevancy and efficiency to be able to see how whether resources were used to achieve the intended outcomes or intended indeed intended outcomes. But also you can do it to disclose findings to stakeholders, maybe to be able to motivate them to get in touch or stay aligned to the project. Then learning, of course, as a major purpose of evaluation, it's important that learning is indeed done. Trying to connect again. Sorry about that. Yeah, the network is not friendly, but I do hope it Okay. So learning, of course, to test assumptions underlying the project, so to see whether indeed our theory of change, the way we had anticipated, is the same way it has gone with our project, but also, of course, to get those findings and share them and make some recommendations for policy, for better policies or better intervention decisions. Okay. When do we do impact evaluation? Of course, when there is a right to produce better findings, because you can't just do evaluation for the sake of doing evaluation. Evaluation must be done in order to get some useful findings for all users. So remember our theory by Patton regarding utilization focused evaluation, whereby you have to look to do evaluation for certain purpose and for certain usage by different stakeholders. But of course, we also do impact evaluation when resources permit. So if you remember again our theory to do with the real world evaluation, one of the constraints is to do with time and resources, and therefore we need to have some adequacy in terms of resources to be able to make a better evaluation. Otherwise, if we use limited resources, we might end up actually just testing a few key evaluation questions and therefore getting some abstract of findings rather than comprehensive findings. And of course, when there is an intended use of evaluation, again, indeed, then you might need that impact evaluation. But of course, it is also appropriate to consider some of the issues if you are planning to do impact evaluation. For instance, is there a clear need or use of findings? Is there a need to understand the intervention impact for a certain issue? So that defines focus. Do you have enough resources to conduct a comprehensive impact evaluation and a rigorous one? Is it clearly linked to the strategic plans and priorities of the organization or agency at that particular time that you want to do it? So those are some of the questions that you might ask yourself if you want to do intervention. If you want to do impact evaluation. So the question now is therefore how do we then plan for an impact evaluation? So I provided you there some links that you might look at. Of course, some of these videos I already uploaded them in Moodle, looking at, for instance, the building blocks for impact evaluation, very interesting one. But of course, while others have many steps, some also have about an average of 7 to 9 steps. But of course, mostly recommended. You need to decide how decisions about the evaluation will be made. You need to make sure you understand and generate the scope of the evaluation. What would you focus in terms of time, in terms of coverage, in terms of content? What is your focus? Develop terms of references, or in other words, what are the deliverables? Okay, what is expected to be delivered in what is expected to be delivered after your evaluation or following your evaluation. Then, of course, after that, you engage the evaluation team, you establish it. This is when, for instance, the consultants are hired, and the terms of references are explained, and therefore this team that is multidisciplinary, that can be able to evaluate comprehensively your project is established and therefore oriented on what is needed. Of course, it is advised that you have external evaluators to remove the issues of bias and so on. Then after engaging the team, you manage development of the evaluation methodology, whether you use what kind of approaches you use. Are you going to experiment? Are you going to use quasi-experimental designs or non-experimental designs? Are you using qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods approaches to evaluate? What kind of methodology do you want? And then after that, you may decide how to manage the evaluation work plan, including logistics, that is allocation of resources, and so on and so forth. Then you manage the implementation of the evaluation, and this is where you now actually conduct the evaluation, because you already have the methodology, you know the focus, you have the team to do it, you know the scope, and so on. And therefore, you also know the importance of why you're doing that evaluation. And then you guide production of quality reports, of course. That has to do with generation of making findings into turning them into reports that can be disseminated or shared among your the stakeholders for purposes of using it to take better decisions. Maybe you want to scale and they want to know where they have gone wrong and where they can go better, and therefore lastly you disseminate those reports and support the use of evaluation, because again, based on the function of learning as the main function of evaluation, then if evaluation reports or evidence is not used, then you have done evaluation for nothing. Okay, so I've already talked about this indeed. So you have the planning phase, you have the planning stages and possible outputs. So possible outputs of the needs of stage one is intervention description, logical models, and so on, and drawing theory of change. And therefore, you also have a brief that has key terms of references. I've already talked about what key terms of references are. Those that explain what is expected of the evaluation. Then you have the methodology and so on. Then you have, of course, the key evaluation questions and so on, determine the available resources, and then engage evaluation team for internal evaluation or external evaluation. And then you have evaluation designs regarding how evaluation will be done. You have a work plan on how your evaluation will be implemented, and then evaluation reports, and then recommendations and policy beliefs for purposes of usage. So this is a whole summarized overview of evaluation. These steps apply to all categories of evaluation. So it's not specifically for impact evaluation alone, but for all categories of evaluation. Okay. So the question then is, what criteria do we need to follow? So the OECD established some criteria, and the criteria involves looking at assessing whether the intervention is doing the right things, and that is the relevancy, or whether or how well does the intervention fit in other contexts or other interventions. So that has to do with coherence. But also impact evaluation can use the criteria of testing effectiveness, and therefore in that case looking at whether the anticipated results or outcomes were achieved or are being achieved. Efficiency, to do with whether the resources that are being used are indeed as we are planned for and for the purpose of achieving certain outcomes. And also, of course, the impact evaluation, testing the impact to see the significant positive, negative, intended or unintended outcomes, and again evaluating sustainability. So whether to see whether those benefits will last or not. Because if you do impact evaluation and you find out that there is a likelihood that the community is not satisfied with your services or with your interventions, then there is a likelihood that the continuity of those benefits after closure of the project might not be there or sustained. So it's very important. Okay, so we have some of the key evaluation, key impact evaluation questions that you may choose to use. You can assess relevancy, equity, gender equality, human rights, and so on. So that has to do with the quality of the intervention. You can assess the effectiveness and efficiency. That has to do with implementation of the intervention. You can assess excuse me, I don't know why this slide is delaying on your screens, but I hope it comes along. You can assess effectiveness, impact, equity, gender equality, etc. So in that case, you may ask yourself a key question of whether the intervention produced the intended results in a short, medium, or long time, and for whom and to what extent, and so on. You can also assess effectiveness, impact, and so on. For instance, looking at the unintended results, positive and negative outcomes, to ask yourself whether whether the intervention has indeed produced certain outcomes that you did not want to occur, and then you ask yourself, of course, how did this occur? You can also assess whether or what the barriers and the enablers of the differences in terms of success and failure. What are those factors that actually influence the success, and what are those that influence the failure, and then you make required changes. But you can also evaluate how ask questions of how the results are valued by the service providers or the beneficiaries of your project. You can also ask yourself a key questions of to what extent the intervention represent the best possible use of available resources or not. And of course, also you can ask whether these particular results that you have realized can be sustained in a long period of time. Okay. Now, we have types of impact evaluation questions. Okay. The other ones that we just talked about, these are key evaluation questions. Okay, but then we have categories of impact evaluation questions. So we have descriptive questions, which ask about how things are and what has happened with your intervention. We have casual questions that ask about whether or not, or to what extent has your intervention created impact. So in that case, testing the causal attribution rather than contribution, remember. And then we have the third type, which is evaluative question, which asks about the overall intervention conclusion, or assessing in terms of success, improvement, of trying to find the best option. If you remember, for instance, a theory on that we looked at, I think also by Patton, that looked at a theory on on developmental evaluation. Okay, so developmental evaluation usually relies on evaluative questions, trying to ask where the success is, where improvement is needed, which are the best options that we can use to apply or not. Okay, so in the next slides, we are going to look at these different questions, and then look at some of the designs that can be used to use this impact evaluation question. Okay, so let's begin with impact evaluation designs for descriptive questions. So we said the descriptive questions ask about how things are and what has happened. So the designs here describe are designed to modified or designed or strategized to describe initial situations before intervention. So for instance, how was the situation before the intervention, then what has changed during implementation, and then what activities and other related interventions are influencing the change that is happening. And then oh dear, so you are not seeing what I'm talking about, but you can listen as we wait for my internet to come back and you see the shared. And then also again, designs for descriptive evaluation question also they look at participants' context and yeah, I'm trying to share back the screen. Yeah, this network is becoming something. So yeah, and so the descriptive questions also ask about the internal and external intervention context. For instance, if a certain number of resources would have improved certain outcomes, or whether lack of certain resources limited achievement of certain outcomes, or looking at whether there are other external environments or conditions, maybe government policies and so on, or community socio-economic structures that have influenced your intervention. Okay, those are the descriptive evaluation questions. So there is a variety of designs, of course. The usual ones, the common ones to us. You can use interviews, you can use questionnaires, you can use observations, you can use geographical information systems or measurements, maybe to look at the physical changes within a community or a certain area where the intervention is. Maybe there was a policy on scaling up road and transportation network in a certain village, and therefore you can use visuals or aerial documentation to see, aerial maps to see whether those changes have been realized. Of course, comparing the current changes with the situation before the intervention. You can use photo voices, where you take pictures and then explain. The pictures can show the changes. So at the beginning, you take pictures of a certain community to see maybe whether they had grass-thatched houses, and then maybe your intention was to improve them into better permanent houses, and therefore now after implementing your project, then you are now taking pictures then you compare those pictures. That's what we call photo voice. Then you can use maybe secondary data to check those they check the information that was there before, or you can use participatory research methods whereby you can engage community members, ask about seasonal calendars. For instance, if you are dealing with a project on agriculture, you can ask, you can use seasonal calendars to see how kind of, I mean, for instance, how has farming changed over different seasons following your implementation of that particular project that you would want. Now that is on that was on designs for descriptive questions. Then we have designs for causal questions. The causal questions we said causal questions are questions that ask about the causal attribution to test whether or not the intended, I mean, the realized outcomes are from the actual intervention that we have implemented. Okay, so we have three main designs. Okay, yes, sorry about that. I think there is a repetition. Yeah, so we have a variety of designs, and you will see one, you have there design one. We can just use the usual usual estimation effect, where you have A1 which was before the program, and then you have A2 which was after the program, and then to estimate the impact or the causal effect, you get A2 minus A1. So for instance, you get the indicator of maybe your project was on improving enrollment in a certain primary school. So after your intervention, you could say, okay, before the intervention, the enrollment and completion rate, the enrollment key was the enrollment percentage was maybe 50%, and then the completion rate was maybe 20. But then after your intervention, maybe you test, and then you realize that you have indicators of now increased percentage of enrollment and increased percentage of yeah, and then maybe you have increased percentage of completion rate. So in that case, you get your A2 after intervention, and then you subtract A1 before intervention, and then you get an estimate of the program effect. But that does not necessarily mean that all your estimates are as a result of your intervention. So later on, we are going to look at how we can control those factors by using actual experiments. In design 2 on your right, you can see you have projected versus post-program. So pre-program versus post-program. So you have a timeline that you are using, of course, to ascertain the trajectories of your aim. So, for instance, so you have the timeline. You can see it there before the program or pre-program, and then so I'm talking about here. Okay, and then the middle line is the intervention. Okay, so after introducing the intervention, you can see the projected projected A1 is the projected trend of how the intervention would improve a certain situation. But above there we have A2, which is the actual the actual post-program realization. So in that case, you get A2 minus A1 to be able to get the actual impact that you have created. But remember now, so remember the counterfactual that we talked about at first. Okay, so the A1 is your counterfactual, okay, with and then A2 would be A2 minus A1 would be the impact value that you have achieved. Now we also have, of course, there is design 3. Of course, network is delaying the display of that, but in design 3 we'll have network again. In design 3 we have with and without program, and let me see if the network is back so that I can share again, because you need to see this. Yeah, I do hope it comes back soon. Yeah, it has been terrible today. Anyway, so you have but never mind, you'll get the recorded video. Okay, in design 3 you have with versus without program. So on your left you have A1 and A2, and then you have B1 and B2. So A has the program but B does not have. So to be able to estimate the impact of the to be able to estimate the impact of your intervention, yeah, to be able to estimate the impact of your the impact of your program in another design. You could have a design that looks at a design that looks at points that are for with program and points that are for without the program. So in that case, to test the impact, you get A minus you get A2 minus A1, which is with the program, and then you get that estimate, and then you also get B minus B1, B2 if the project was there, or I mean if the project was not there, you get that trajectory, and you see after you have implemented your intervention what has changed in B where there is no intervention, and then you get B, the current B during after your implementation, and then you subtract B1 which was before the intervention, and then after getting all those estimates, then you get the estimated effect of A1 which was with the intervention minus B1 minus the difference of B2 and B1 which was with without the program, and then you can get an estimate of your impact. In another design, you can have the classic research design, which involve actual experiment. Design, I mean, you have control and experimental groups that you can indeed test from the beginning. So let me see if I can stop sharing this, and then share again. The internet is down again. Let me just continue explaining. You'll get the video. In another design, you have experimental designs which actually do the actual social experiment. So you have at the beginning, before intervention, you have two groups. One is control group, another one is experimental group. So in other words, you have the intervention group, a group that receives the intervention and the group that does not receive the intervention, but they must have the same characteristics. Okay, so then you introduce the intervention. Okay, then after introducing the intervention, you may realize that, okay, the group that has the intervention, because of whatever you have done, the activities, the inputs, and so on, there is a realized change, which is positive, of course. And then even in B, there could be some realization of change. Okay, and then when you want to test or estimate the impact of that, so you get A and B, which were identical at the beginning. Now you get the increase in A2 minus increase in B2. So B is the program, the group that did not receive the intervention. A is the group that received the intervention. So to be able to know whether your project has achieved the intended outcomes, or to what extent, then you get the achievements of A, which was with the intervention, minus the achievements of, or the status of B, which was without the intervention. And then there you can attribute that, okay, my intervention is the one that is responsible for this particular change. Okay. I don't know why this is not coming along with the presentation that you have. Let me see if I can make some change. Oh. So we have three main designs for causal evaluation questions. If we really want to attribute our changes to, if we want to attribute the realized outcomes to a certain intervention, we have three main designs for that. One is experimental, second is quasi-experimental, and the third is non-experimental design. To begin with, the experimental design, the experimental design looks at so you have of course, the more experimental you are, the stronger you are in terms of determining or attributing your outcomes to your intervention. Okay, so because there you have, with experimental designs, you have a control, you can control factors and therefore can be able to attribute. But the more you become less experimental, the less you are likely to control the other factors that might influence achievement of your outcomes. Okay, so that's why I have given you this dichotomy regarding the causality demonstration, that the experimental designs demonstrate a have the strongest way of testing causality attribution compared to these others. So for experimental designs, you have you must construct a control group through a random assignment. So you identify a certain community, where your intervention is being implemented, and then after that you select the eligible participants, which you can later on group into control and treatment groups. Okay, and then it's those that you can now assign in terms of control or treatment. Now, the eligibility depends on your focus. You may be focusing on studying communities as your subjects, or I mean your participants, or you might say, okay, you use schools in a certain area, or you use individuals in a certain area, or you want to use women or men or adults or youth, depending on your focus of the intervention. Okay, so in that case you will have two identical groups, but one will receive the intervention and the other one will not receive the intervention. Now, what does this mean? It means that from the beginning of your intervention, you already know which group will be tested to ascertain certain changes, and the group that would be identical but would later on also be assessed to use their situations to ascertain the change that has been realized in the group that has received the services or your intervention, and that's the project group. Okay, so those are the two different groups. So know that randomized control trial, experimental designs are planned right from the beginning. Experimental designs are planned from the beginning. You do not start thinking of implementing an experimental design when you are testing design at the end, and when you did not identify the control group or comparison group at the beginning. It will be difficult for you. Okay. So what do? You randomize. Why do we randomize? Oh, why do we do random sampling of individuals or the subjects that we want to test? We want to ensure systematic differences. We want to ensure that there is no systematic difference between the project the project group and the control group, because if there are differences at the end of the day, then you wouldn't be able to know that actually the realized changes were part of were because of the intervention. Okay, but we also randomize to reduce biases. Okay, biases that would have appeared if there was no randomization, because there is there is self-selection bias whereby individuals may decide to join or not join. You also have the agency selection bias. The implementing agency selects units to participate or not. Those are biases. So to remove those biases, we do use random sampling or randomization to make sure that first the groups are identical. At second, there is no bias in selecting. Okay, so therefore, when we talk about randomization, it means that every individual who is eligible has a chance. There is a probability that they will be selected. Okay. So how do we randomize? Okay, randomization equals equal chance of participation. Okay, for every unit. The units I talked about them could be schools, could be area centers, could be individuals, could be communities. Okay, could be teachers, could be health providers, etc. So typically you use a computer, generate numbers, and then draw those numbers out of maybe a hat or whatever you want to do. You think about how these rotary things are done, okay? And then, of course, put in any container and so on. And then you draw, you just draw samples naturally out of whatever container you are using, to make sure that at least each of those components had a chance. Because if you do not use the randomization, then you might be biased to select certain categories who might not actually be even eligible to participate in that particular experiment. So one common example of experimental design is randomized control trials. Okay, like I said, I won't get into details of this, but I've provided some of the materials, reading materials. You can get in touch with those materials and get familiar with this. Get more details. But I said also you have more information on this when you have a whole module regarding impact evaluation. Okay, so in randomized control trials, so you have intervention group that receives the intervention or benefits from your project, and then you have the control group, which is also selected at random from the same eligible population. Okay. And then, of course, the purpose is to test the extent to which specific planned impacts are being achieved. And of course, the RSTCs provide a very powerful response to questions of causality, because at least you know that particular group is similar to the control group and they have similar characteristics, and therefore if you check and there are changes in the group that has participated in the program, then there is a likelihood that you are controlling for counterfactual, and therefore you can be able to test the differences in terms of changes that have happened following your intervention. Okay. So the overview of the RCT is that you specify the intervention program theory and outcomes, then established unit of assignment and eligible population, maybe it's a certain community or in a certain school and so on. Then now out of those you randomly assign samples of eligible of population to participate in control and also to participate in intervention group, and then you collect baseline data for both groups to make sure, remember, to make sure you have the situation, to know the situation or establish indicators at the beginning, and then you, of course, you collect data about you implement the intervention, then you collect the data about the implementation, could be midterm or so on, and you have your reports, and then at the end you also create the end line or closure data, and then calculate the impact. And then therefore you can prepare your final report. That's how the RCT is done. Okay, so that's why I was telling you, don't remember to do experimental designs when you are in the middle of implementation, because it will not work for you. Okay, so you can visit these links to have some of the examples. For instance, you had the intervention on early childhood development in Pakistani, and then you have Esther Duflo. Esther Duflo is one of the champions of randomized control trials. So you can visit this and see how some of these social experiments to fight poverty are done. Okay, and one of them I think was about distribution of mosquito nets in a certain community, and therefore they tested the changes in those who received and those who did not receive. Of course, we are going to also see that one of the challenges with the experiment is that there is some kind of question on how rights of others who are supposed to receive services are not. Okay. So the experiments are very good because there is equivalence between intervention group and control groups. And then, of course, and therefore that of course helps you to ascertain the actual attribution of the impact. But then you have the weaknesses, which are several. You have, for instance, the Hawthorne effect. For instance, people might behave differently when they know they are being watched, and therefore at the end of the day you might have a marred picture that maybe your intervention is working when it is not. Yeah, for instance, people, if you start distributing books or scholastic materials or giving cash aid to certain groups of youth to go to school, there might be some kind of pretense, and therefore at the end you realize that you are achieving your results when indeed the population is just pretending because they know they are being studied. So then you have ethical and legal issues, as I had said. For instance, rights of those that are supposed to be receiving. So for instance, if you choose to a certain community and you sample and some receive the services, others do not receive, and yet their situation is the same. So there is some question of, okay, what about those that don't they also deserve? Of course, for purposes of studies, of research, that is justifiable, but for purposes of equality and so on, that could be a problem. There is also a problem with generalization of impact. Attribution versus contribution, because at the end of the day, it could be that yes, maybe the treatment group or those that benefited from the project have been able to change based on certain particular context, maybe because they are resources and maybe they know they are part of the project. Could it be that maybe some of these factors are indeed trying to influence that particular factor? But also, on the other hand, experiments can also help to eliminate that. Okay, so but at the end of the day, the problem is that if you have only tested that particular group in certain contexts, let's say maybe you were providing scholastic materials to motivate students to stay in school in a certain community. Could be that there are other factors that are influencing their stay in school. But if you shifted this particular program to another community and you're trying to scale it up, it could be that maybe the context has changed and the results that you have achieved in this particular school may not be the same as those that you have achieved that you could achieve in another school. So there is a likelihood of difficulties in terms of replication because the context change. Then there is also a problem of spillover program impacts, also going to the comparison or control group. Okay, so there is that problem, and therefore your control group might also benefit indirectly when you did not actually provide. So take an example: you are giving cash transfers to a certain community to help them improve their livelihoods. But then, in this community that you are testing, where you have control and treatment group, if you give money to the treatment group, it could be that the treatment group has communal networks, social networks with the control group, and therefore they can be able to share their dividends out of this cash transfer with the other control group. And therefore, the control group is also benefiting indirectly. So when it comes to testing the actual impact, your estimates might be wrong, or they could be realized, or there could be change realized, but it couldn't be exact. You wouldn't get the exact attribution because the control group that you are comparing to also indirectly benefited from your group. So those are the spillovers we are talking about. There is also non-compliance. Some treatments members of the treatment groups may not want to participate even when you select them. So for instance, using mosquito nets or contraceptives. Okay, look at, for instance, the example of contraceptives. If you choose some households, some men and women might say no to participation even when they are eligible because of the sensitivity of a certain project. There is also attrition, dropout in both groups. So at the end of the day, when it comes to estimation, because of the dropout negatively affect the representation. Let's say in the beginning you had 50-50, but then in the due course of your implementation, some members are kept on reducing. You might find that in one group you no longer have a balance to measure your estimates. That maybe in one group people just decided to withdraw, and that might affect your overall thing. Okay. Now. That is all about experimental designs. So let's just take a quick overview about on quasi-experimental designs. So you have in the quasi-experimental designs, we do not have we don't do randomization. Okay. We do not do randomization. So in that case, we do not have controlled groups. We do not control factors that would influence our intervention. But rather, we have comparison groups. So in this case, we have groups that have some kind of similar characteristics with our treatment group that is receiving the intervention. Okay, they have similarities, but we do not control the other factors of the other group. Okay, so in other words, that's why we do not have randomization, but we do pre-test and post-test of with comparison. So between comparison and the intervention group. Okay. Maybe to make it clear. Okay. Then, of course, we have variety of means. So one would ask, okay, then how then do we make sure that the comparison group has similar characteristics? Okay, so there are variety of strategies that we can use to construct a comparison group, and examples are regression discontinuity, and then you have difference in differences, and then you have matching. So in this case, you use those strategies that will help you to make sure that the group that you'll be comparing your intervention group with would have similar characteristics, maybe in terms of age, maybe in terms of salary scale, maybe in terms of farming outputs, maybe in terms of income levels. So maybe in terms of gender. All those are characteristics that you could use to make sure that there is some relative similarity between your intervention group and comparison group that from the beginning you're already comparing that. At the end of the intervention, you will then compare these two groups to see whether in the intervention group there is better achievement of results compared to the comparison groups that do not receive the intervention. Okay. So for instance, you could select a community, maybe let's say giving vouchers for easy access of maternal health services. So you're giving vouchers so that those so that women who receive vouchers can use those vouchers to go to health centers and use the vouchers to access maternal and child health care services. Okay, so in that case, you could look for women, a group of women that maybe women who have who are 3 months pregnant, who have 3 months pregnant up to the 8 months of pregnancy, or and then they are of a particular age, they are of a particular household income level, and so on. And then you also get a comparison group that is relatively of the similar characteristics. Okay. So, but note that the selection effects may occur if the intervention group so remember that the selection effects may occur if the intervention group characteristics differ from the comparison group. So in other words, you might get different, the results that are not quite to the standard, or not with a good picture of what is actually happening if the characteristics differ. Of course, no one can say that that you can have in a quasi-experimental design you would have 100% similarity between the two groups, between the comparison and the intervention group. But at least when you're selecting both groups, there must be some good level of similarity. That's what we are trying to communicate. There must be that kind of good similarity if you really want to achieve better results. Okay. Yeah, so in principle, this is how it works. So you have intervention group, and then you have comparison group. So the intervention group receives the intervention, and then the comparison group does not receive the intervention. And of course, you do the baseline for both groups, and then you also do assessment for both groups at the end. So you do a pre-test, which has to do with baseline, and then you do a post-test after intervention to check whether your intervention has indeed created certain changes within the population or the communities where you are implementing that particular social experiment or intervention. Okay. And I am not going to go through these I had already talked about the ways, the strategies or means of selecting comparison groups, so I won't go through them. I just provided an overview here. So for instance, for regression discontinuity, you assign treatment and comparison groups based on certain variables or cutoff. So for example, you can say, okay, students must score above 80 on entrance exam. or household income below $1,000 per year, or farms below 1.5 hectares. So in that case, when you are choosing your comparison groups, you would look for those that are closely related to that particular that have similar characteristics, and then you can do a comparison. Okay. For difference in difference, you look at the level of comparison in terms of observed changes before and after, and then for a sample participants and non-participants, where you are looking at with and without the intervention. For matching overview, you select groups that match similar characteristics, that match with comparison and the treatment group. Okay, so that's how you look for you establish your comparison groups. Okay. The strength and weaknesses of quasi-experimental is that, of course, the quasi-experimental can assure you some level of attribution that indeed your project is responsible for the results that are being realized. There is some kind of accuracy in assessment of effects, because at least you know the characteristics of both groups. But the weakness is that it may demand more resources and time to establish those groups and implement it. But it also may require two similar groups for comparison. It requires two similar groups of comparison, and yet it might be difficult to look for a comparison group that would match or be similar, that would be similar to the treatment group. Then lastly, on the causal questions designs, we have non-experimental designs, which systematically test whether evidence is consistent with expected results, or if the intervention is producing the impacts, or whether the factors whether other factors could be providing an alternative explanation. Okay, so again, there is no randomization, so no control groups, but also no comparison groups in this case. Okay, no control and comparison groups. Okay, for experimenting. But you also do pretest and post-test with no comparison. So this is the usual implementation of our impact evaluation without experiments. So you have your baseline, which is done under pretest. Okay, and then so in this case you are dealing with one group rather than dealing with the two groups of control or comparison and treatment in your experiment and quasi-experimental. In non-experimental, you use only one intervention group, so you go and check your intervention or the participants, those that are receiving your mosquito nets or contraceptives or cash or voucher and so on, and then you do pretest, which is a baseline to establish their status at the beginning, and then you also do the post test after you have implemented intervention, and then you can estimate. But the problem with this is that there is a low level of attribution compared to the experimental and quasi-experimental design, because in this case you are not controlling or even looking at other groups that might have benefited or might have influenced your intervention. Okay. So you can also choose to do one pretest or two pretests and one post-test and a second post-test, depending on your aim or your focus of what you want to achieve. So for instance, the pretest one could be maybe during baseline, pretest 2 could be midterm, and then you do post-test, which could be at the end of the intervention, and then you also do a post-test 2, which could be maybe you want to measure the sustainability of your impact. So it depends on your focus and aim. The strength is that it is relatively simpler compared to the experimental designs. and it controls the intentions of participants' prior perceptions. For instance, changing behaviors and so on, the ones we just looked at during explanation for experimental designs. The weakness is that it cannot isolate other factors. It checks contributions, not attribution, only focuses on impact changes, and of course there is a likelihood of having even lower post-test than pre-test scores, because you did not control influencing factors that would have helped in making sure that your implementation is focused. There are also, remember, we had 3 questions. So the third category of question was descriptive evaluation design. No, it was evaluative design. Okay, evaluative evaluation questions. Okay, so evaluative evaluation questions, they rely more on tools. Yeah, they rely more on tools that are rely more on they use more on rubrics rather than what we have just seen up in terms of experiments and so on. So in this case you have evaluation tools that use a set of criteria just to systematically check checking multiple impacts, but also drawing conclusions about whether the program is successful or it needs improvements, or it needs best options for improvement. So in other words, this can check the impact through the implementation processes so that you can make certain changes or not. So, data collection approaches and methods for impact evaluation. Of course, you need extensive, comprehensive, rigorous methods if you really want to ascertain attribution. And you can use 3 main approaches as always: qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. But of course, as we said in the previous sessions regarding methodological approaches to evaluation, we said we looked at the significance of using mixed methods in terms of ensuring and maximizing validity, reliability, or trustworthiness of your data. But also you can use primary and secondary data options. So you remember the idea of triangulation. And of course, very important that you must look for methods or approaches that match your data collection approach, that match your methods with key evaluation questions. Otherwise, if there is a mismatch, you might end up getting wrong data for wrong purposes, okay, or getting wrong good data for wrong purposes, okay. So it's very important. So there is a whole range of data collection methods. So please revisit a session on methodological approaches to get more acquainted with this. But you can also look at Pearsman 2014 to get more details. I shared that document. So who can be involved in the process? All project or intervention stakeholders, of course, depending on the purpose of why you are doing the evaluation, okay, usage of the evaluation and so on. But mostly, as advised, consider participatory approaches, because it is very important that you get detailed and more relevant information, and consider ethical rights and perspectives when selecting those participants. It's very important. It is also essential that that you put into considerations of the different characteristics of different participants. Okay, so to ensure the relevance of the evaluation, to make sure that you hear people's own versions or voices about the change, rather than you designing objective questionnaires and just distribute them for ticking, rather than hearing about the meaning or what value those participants have for your project. And then it is also very important that you consider those participatory approaches that build some level of ownership between participants. Okay, so some of the key terms that we have looked at include impact evaluation, counterfactual, baseline, intervention groups, control groups, randomized control trials, experimental designs, quasi-experimental, non-experimental, key evaluation questions, and so on. So for your review, you could look at, for instance, what is counterfactual, why is it important, what are the differences between experimental and non-experimental impact evaluation designs, the common threats to impact evaluation, and of course, based on your project that you may choose to look at, how will you phase in the impact evaluation within the process. And I have also provided some reading materials that you might focus on, might give you more details whenever you need. Okay, so thank you very much. That is it. I know it has been a long presentation, but there was so much, but then I had also to cut some. Okay, so thank you.